Hi there, and welcome back to Beyond the Schoolhouse. Today, we are going to talk about raising thinkers in an age of institutional failure. If you look around us, there is chaos in the media, in institutions. We commonly hear of moral failings or situations in schools where things aren't working, differences of opinion on how medical issues are handled. People are disagreeing. And the question is, what do we do when the systems we were raised to trust stop working? Or maybe they're still working, but we don't trust them. And so we don't know how to engage with them or be a part or use them. So if you have children, you might be asking, how do I make educational decisions? Whether you're talking about joining a school, being part of a school where you may not agree with everything, or maybe joining a homeschool co op. Again, how do we find our tribe? How do we find our people who we can agree enough with to work in an institutional type format? And as parents, what do we do when we no longer trust schools, the media, government, or even churches with our children? We just don't trust them carte blanche, but maybe we still want to be part of those organizations. How do we think about participating? How do we think about obedience, like going along to get along, or discerning? And how do we take a stand? What does that look like as we're asking big questions around the topic of participating in institutions? So come along with me today while Simit and I have a conversation about raising thinkers in an age of institutional failure. All right. So, welcome back. And today we are going to talk about raising our kids in an era of institutional failure. Many of us have grown up in institutions. Maybe we went to schools or churches, or we partook in medical institutions or any other ones. And we are struggling, or we don't agree 100%. And we're trying to figure out how to raise our own kids outside that model that we were raised in. So I currently have kids in a school and homeschooled. And Simit, let's talk about your kids too.
Yes, they are in school. So I bet.
Private schools, right? But did you went to private schools too, though, right?
Well, I would distinguish. I went to a Catholic school. I'm not Catholic, but I went to a Catholic school, and my kids go to a secular private, independent. They like the term independent private school.
Okay. Oh, I get, yeah, those are two different models because the religious private schools kind of combine the religious institution and just like an education institution. It's kind of like two.
Yes.
And my kids do go to a religious school. So I have kids at a public university, not private. So when we talk about raising kids in this generation where institutions are kind of like, I don't know. Would you say they're under attack, or how would you describe it? Like,
Crumbling, losing trust. Losing trust is whether you like them or not. I don't think anyone. I don't know how anyone would dispute that they're at large losing trust. Right? Like people, if you say, "Oh, I don't believe the New York Times. I don't believe whatever." I mean, some people will still trust it and be like, well, that's you have a bad opinion, but it's understood that that's a common perception.
all right, so we are talking about institutions losing trust or maybe institutional failure. Like, why do you think that is happening? I mean, like, I feel like I'm just like less trustworthy. I don't even know if the institutions have changed themselves so much. Like, I think they are kind of the same way that they were when I was a kid, but I definitely don't trust them like with my own kids. So even the institutions where my kids go, I'm highly skeptical and I will push back. Why do you think that we're dealing with this now and we didn't deal with it, I don't know, when we were kids so much?
Some of it, I think, is informational, meaning people know more now. They know more scandals, or they've been exposed to. You could debate whether they've been exposed to real information or not, but there are many scandals that have been exposed or communicated. So that's weakened a lot of these institutions, right? Like a lot of religious institutions have been under scandal. There's a whole bunch of government scandals, like all the time. Big corporations have their scandals, and it just gets spread around more. Probably something to do with the internet, of social media, and a lot of citizen journalism. So maybe that's helping to propagate this in a way. And then I think also, I always think, I'm sure others will may not share this view, but income inequality is a major factor to social stability. So the fact that like in the United States. So I grew up like in the 1980s, early 90s, you might say, and the income inequality was much less then. There was a more robust middle class. Now wealth is very, very concentrated. And I think that's led to the capture of institutions where a lot of these big institutions are basically controlled by moneyed interests. And that has also weakened their credibility. So people will wonder, you know, I don't mean to pick on the New York Times. It's a convenient example, but it's like, does the New York Times actually work for the people, or do they work for corporate interests that are paying their ads? CNN's another example, right? Big media is the easiest example, where it's like when you see pharmaceutical ads on CNN, is CNN incentivized to tell you the real story, or are they incentivized to tell you what will not offend and maybe support their pharmaceutical sponsors?
Yeah, it's kind of like follow the money. With any institution, we're now highly skeptical of like who is paying or who is donating or who has an interest in the message that this organization is propagating. It's true in schools where some students might be treated one way and then others seem to get special treatment and you go, but they made big donations. That happened to me when I was in school, like, "Oh, we'll treat you special if your dad gives money." Or in churches, sometimes they're accused of softening the message or only speaking on topics that the big donors are okay with. Like, the big donors don't like that topic, so we're not gonna talk about it. And institutions seem interested in protecting the institution, right? So as parents, we're trying to teach critical thinking. Meanwhile, places we send our kids are trying to protect the institution. We're trying to get our kids to like look at all the different things. And the institution is trying to hide things often, not always. So at Palace, we're always trying to create resources where we help parents develop kids who are critical thinkers. How do you think this connects to helping raise kids in institutions, around institutions, like breaking through that institutional mindset?
Yeah, I think it's mostly, I wouldn't say that, although some people would say that all institutions are bad. I wouldn't say that, but I do think it helps to think critically. And maybe the hardest part is when you're a part of an institution, there's that like herd mentality, or, like COVID is a great example, regardless of what you think of it. So many people, that was the most like, you felt the pressure of whatever, the vaccine, the mask, the social distancing, shutting down your business, all this. I mean, some shutting down business was legally enforced, but for many of these other things, there were social norms, and especially like in a grocery store is a great example where you go to the grocery store, they might have a little bit of a sign, like, hey, stay apart or wear a mask. Often it might not even be, it might just be a sign of like a mask, which is not necessarily like, I guess you're telling me to wear a mask, but it's not, it doesn't say, wear a mask or we'll kick you out. You know what I mean? It's not like that. So then the institution is kind of enforcing, or maybe a soft positioning of that, but the norm is set in this institution. Hey, this is how we're going to behave in this institution. So I would hope the hardest part, well, one is there's information. I'm going to consume this information and come to my own conclusion, right? So there's maybe just don't accept immediately what the institution's saying. But then on top of that, the harder part is honestly, if you come to a conclusion that's different than the institution, you'll need the courage to do what you believe is right. And then you have to mitigate that. Like, you don't just want to rebel for the sake of rebelling. Are you sticking to principles that are valid and that you actually believe in and that you believe are correct and the proper way to behave? And doing that in the face of a lot of social pressure and COVID. I'm just mentioning that as there's lots of these examples on like many, many different types of issues. But that was the one that's like, whoa, like really everybody will know what I'm talking about because they all lived through it, right? Any adults, right?
Yes.
so
Yes.
so that's just, having that courage is almost the hardest part. But if you don't have the knowledge, you're never gonna have. I don't, you're not even gonna know what's going on, right? So maybe the knowledge is the first step. The true mountain to climb is the courage, the principle, the conviction, all that type of stuff. But you at least need to know that maybe they're not telling you the truth, and maybe you should research it, and maybe you'll agree with them. But at least think about it first.
Yes. I tend to think my sisters and I often talk about how I'll use the medical profession. We view doctors and the medical profession as consultants. We prefer to do our own research, trust our own experience and intuition and research, and then go to a doctor if necessary to give us their very informed opinion. But then we use all of that information together to make a decision rather than the institutional mindset, which is this doctor is a doctor and therefore I should listen to this person regardless of my own research, regardless of other opinions or different perspectives. So that same idea of training our kids to become independent thinkers means cultivating the idea that they should think autonomously on a broad number of topics. And that could be anything. It could be related to nutrition, it could be related to education, could be related to their faith, lots of different topics. And it starts with small things, in my opinion. Like getting them to use their voice for things that are small is important. Last couple weeks ago, we had something at one of our kids' schools where there was an issue. And in my opinion, the school was in the wrong. So I talked to my son. And when he went and talked to the principal at the school, he said, "Look, you broke your own policy." He said this to the principal. "You broke your own policy. My mom's upset because you broke your policy. You didn't keep your side of the deal. You didn't keep your word." And I'm like, yes, that's what I want them to recognize is that institutions have policies and they sometimes break their policies. And it's okay for us to use our voices, speak up, identify a problem. But again, all of that is like a process of helping our kids realize that their voice is powerful, look at all the factors. And again, we use institutions, so I'm happy that they exist, but they are not the supreme authority, so to speak, over our life. That's kind of how I view it. Like, I don't want my kids to think that an institution has more of a say than their own research and thinking and I want them to think critically and get multiple perspectives before they take action and not
Right.
doubt themselves.
It's ultimately your life, or in the case of
Yes.
your kids, it's their life, right? So it's like
Yes.
some institution will tell you what to do, but they have limited exposure to the consequences, right?
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
ultimately is the consequences all fall upon you or your kids, so that maybe that person should decide or think about it a little more.
Yes. Which I think it's you have to get to a place where you're comfortable being in charge of your own consequences or like taking ownership over the consequences of your own decisions. I think maybe that's what's happening. It's like when you go to an authority and you say like whatever you say is true, doctor, pastor, teacher, whatever you say goes, I will just do what you say, then you are leaving the consequences of the decision kind of in their court. Like you're saying like I'll follow you, but if it doesn't go well, then I can blame you. Whereas when you take those decisions on yourself, you are also going to live with the consequences of your own choices, which is kind of uncomfortable,
Yes, right.
you
So
know?
a part of it this, I guess, is accountability, right? Like you don't necessarily have the option to just outsource your thinking to
Yes.
entirely, right? Like the consultant model you said, right? Like you can take feedback, right? They can help, but ultimately, you need to own the decision.
That's right. Like my example recently was talking to a doctor and he wanted me to use an antibiotic. And I said, no, I'm going to take garlic. And he said, oh, no, no, you can't do that. And I said, well, I'm going to, but I understand that it is your responsibility to prescribe the antibiotic. And if this does not go well, that is 100% on me, right? Like I said, like I know that your role is to do what you were trained to do. And if I do it my way and it goes badly, that is on me. I know that, you know?
Garlic. I'm so glad you mentioned garlic. I'm always trying to. I love garlic, so I drench my food in it to almost disgusting
So
extent.
good.
No one else in my family likes garlic as much, so I'm always trying to sneak it in, like put a little bit here, put a little bit there over, hopefully over the course of a day, I've gotten enough. But it's everyone. I mean, do your own research. Garlic is, and try it out. It
Try it
goes very
out.
far.
Yeah. And then you might not have very many friends because you
Right.
smell like garlic. But yes, yes,
So you'll
yes.
feel good. You
You'll
might be
feel
alone, but
good
you'll feel good.
and
Yeah.
it works really great. But yes, it's like it was a very interesting confrontation because he was telling me what he thought was best, and he was very passionate about it, and he was very caring, but I was equally passionate about the fact that I did not want what he was giving me. And so, like, who knows if he'll treat me again, but at the same time, it's like you have to be willing to take a stand. I think that's what it is. Like, none of this matters. If you have a different opinion, and you've researched it but you aren't willing to take a stand, then it doesn't matter. That's kind of what COVID proved, right? Like a lot of people disagreed internally, but they still went along because the messaging in the institution in the culture was, what were they saying? It was kind of like, it was like, you don't like love people kind of thing if you don't wear a mask or if you don't take, well, I can't even remember the messaging. I just remember the pressure.
Stay at home, save lives. That was part of
Yes.
the messaging.
Yes. Like
But
a
yeah,
lot of,
that also relates to, like, I think a lot of what's going on as institutions, as there's this like institutional collapse or decay, is finding your own tribe. Meaning, so if somebody wants to have a antibiotic heavy approach, or they antibiotic first approach, or whatever, like the person that you saw, the practitioner, right? They may want a patient population like that. They may want their friends like that, or whatever, and that's their choice. And but I think the world we're maybe already in or moving towards is more so, finding your people, finding your tribe. So if you haven't found that yet, I think maybe that's the hard part for a lot of people is, finding that. You know what I mean?
yeah, I see that a lot in the homeschool space where people have difficulty finding their tribe. And I think the reason that happens is people have different priorities of what their top pain points are. For example, like Christian homeschoolers might say, like, we want to be around faith-based people. That's our top priority. So they're going to look for that. And if they also think eating vegetables is more important than junk food, they might still be okay with hanging out with people that eat junk food, right? Because their top priority is a faith-based community. Hopefully they're fine with that. But if people have some more niche top priorities, then it can sometimes be difficult to find your tribe because, yeah,
And sometimes I think people haven't fully defined it. Like, one thing I've seen a fair amount is, especially in the case of homeschooling. So a pattern I see is that, like, a child is getting bullied. Obviously, that's very it's
very
terrible for
common.
the kid. You can imagine as a parent. I mean, it's you feel helpless in a way, or you have to do something. And often it results in so often it will result in taking the kid out of school. Usually, they'll try to work with the school. That maybe they'll reach out to the big bullying parent or whatever,
Yes.
the parent of the bully or whatever. And again, a lot of this is like hearsay, he said, she said, who knows? It's debatable as to what the actual facts of the situation are in some of these instances. But anyway, the parent of the bullied child will then feel like there's no only option is to withdraw from the school. And then it's like, all right, private school, that can be cost prohibitive. They might not be one in the area. There might not be a good one. Often it requires whole transportation, scheduling, conflict that interferes with other aspects of your life. So then you're homeschooling, but then it's like as you know, that also can be challenging. And also, it helps to have a support system there. And then they'll reach out, they'll be like, all right, let me find other homeschoolers. But maybe they'll meet someone who's like, this is very, they're in the faith based group and they might not be of the same faith, or they may not have it, might not be so core to their identity. So then it's like, well, what is your identity? And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm just trying to not have my kid get bullied is mostly what this is about. Then,
Yes.
but they almost need some kind of anchor. Otherwise, they're just by themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I
And
do
that's the
understand because I see this in Facebook groups where people are looking for a co-op and they'll put something like, I'm looking for a co-op where kids don't bully other kids or
right.
things like that.
Yes.
And that is obviously going to be a goal with a bunch of moms present. We're not like encouraging our kids to bully each other, and we don't really tolerate that, but it's also not the identity of any group, like we're the anti-bully group, like that's not the reason people gather. And so you're right. Like when people are leading with something that's not like a core identity for a large group of people, like that's not the number one reason they're homeschooling, it's going to make it harder to find a group that's a good fit because in that case there's often kids are kids and sometimes they'll say things and some you still have to learn how to resolve conflict even in a homeschool group, even in a group where people don't like encourage bullying, you still have to learn how to resolve conflict. So that's a really good example. Sometimes another example is like sometimes the reason people homeschool is they have maybe some extreme allergies or health problems. And they think, I want a group where it's allergy friendly or something like that. But there's not a large group of people that just gather based on allergy friendly. So that
Well,
becomes tricky.
and that's where I think like a lot of these people without a group, like often they're motivated by something negative. And when I say negative, I mean in the grammatical term, meaning like their definition is not this, right? So not bullying, not peanuts or whatever the allergy is, right? So I think it's hard to anchor a group identity around uh, a logical negative, like the Christian homeschooling space. I'm not Christian, you're Christian, so this is not an endorsement or anything like that, or not endorsement, not criticism, just an observation. One of the reasons that works so well and why it has a robust community is that the value system is very clearly articulated. We've talked about this before, right? So what is it? Everyone knows, going in there, this person's going to be Christian, they're going to believe in Jesus. There's a whole vocabulary, that's built up around what this means. And right away going in. And so it becomes easier to meet a stranger and build that sort of community. Whereas with peanuts, if you're like, or bullying's even a better example of like, if it's not bullying, then like it might help to define what are the behaviors and even the culture around that. So we're going to show respect or respect oriented. Okay, so that's one. And then how do we define that? What are what does respectful mean to us? You know what I mean? That type of stuff. What are the ways we behave? Do we even things like, do you agree with a handshake? Do you wave? Do you whatever? And all that jargon. Like I
Very
studied martial,
subjective. Like what you're describing, though, is very subjective, right?
but that's useful because for some people, like when I studied martial arts a lot growing up, and when you would be in the dojo, the martial arts training, you would always address. It doesn't matter if it's a 7-year-old person or a 45-year-old person, Mister or Miss. You would not call them by their first name, right? So I wouldn't just be like, "Hey, Sarah, what's going on?" It would always be, "Oh, um, Miss McCubbin," right? Like you probably use Miss for a woman you don't know their marital
Yeah.
status. You don't want to bring that in, right? So that would just be the way you address. That was like part of the culture of respect that they were trying to instill for a school. Most people would not apply that to a regular homeschool co-op type thing. The students wouldn't address each other Mr. or Miss, the last name, but they might have other conventions.
Right.
Thinking about that, helping to define that, will be like, oh, yeah, we both believe in respect, but your conventions are different than mine, so maybe we're not a match. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Or we are a
Yes.
match.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because in order to kind of break through institutional thinking, you actually have to spend some time identifying what is institutional thinking, which I found I didn't really even know what it was until I started having problems. And I started feeling frustrated and then started like thinking, reading, talking, studying, trying to figure out what it was. Because if most of us were raised in institutions, and so we've just kind of accepted it. And so first you have to kind of break out of that, which, it's a different path for everybody. But once you do, you start to see it everywhere. And then the path forward is again, can be kind of lonely, in my opinion. It's a little lonely sometimes because if you are very principled, then you risk not being able to be part of anything, right? Like there's always going to be something that you disagree on. It's, you know, when my kids went to the private school that they go to now, it was where I went, and my experience wasn't good at the end. And so I told my kids, we're going to go to this school, but you aren't special and they're not going to think you're special. They have rules and we're going to follow the rules while we're here. And if it doesn't work anymore, if it stops working and you don't like it here anymore, then we'll leave. But we're not going to stay. We're not going to fight. We're not going to get really upset because I know that institutions don't tend to have nuanced thinking. They're like, here's our rules. Here's the playbook. Take it or leave it. And so for somebody who's kind of here's somebody who's thinking, you have to kind of come up with your own lines, your own rules over when is it time to go and when will you stay? Like, how much will you put up with from an institution, even though you might still disagree with some of it? I mean, that's same in a co-op too. It's all the same.
Right. Yeah, there is a tense negotiation with a lot of these things. That's
Yes.
why even with my kids' school, I'll often tell my wife, I was like, I don't know how much I get what you're saying. Like when I like something, how much of a stink do you want to make about this? Because it's kind of like take it or leave it. So if you're not willing to leave it, you
Yes.
don't have that much bluffing going on. You don't have that much negotiation really. It's take
Yes.
it or leave it.
Which in my case, what I do with those situations is then my children become they get lectured. And I point out all the institutional stuff to them, not because we're going to leave, but because I want them to see it. I want them to see hey, this is what's happening in this institution. This is what they're saying. This is how they're not keeping their word or it's not lining up with their policies. This is how it affects people. I don't want it to affect you, so I want you to see it so you understand it. And you're going to see this again in the future, so I want you to just recognize it. Something like that. That's how we do it because there's nothing perfect, right? I mean, and unless you're willing to leave.
Right, right. And that's going to be as people look to form their own tribe, that's sort of something they're going to think about. If you're a founder of the tribe, right, you're starting your own homeschool co-op,
Yes.
you're going to have to think about what is our identity, right, which goes back to what I was saying about the positive values and then how much leeway is there? How much is this look, like in my martial arts school, obviously if you address someone by their first name, you wouldn't get kicked out of the school, right?
Right.
But in certain instances, you might. Or what's your
Yep.
leeway on some of this stuff? Is it just a
Yeah.
soft school, or is it like, look, you're done?
Yeah. And this is actually of a few episodes ago, we talked about making a handbook. And this is a great reason, if somebody's going to start a new group or they've got a group where it's been a bumpy start, they should probably go back and look at their handbook. And we talked about all the reasons why that was so important. Because if you're defining your tribe, if you're starting something new or you have a group and you're saying these are our core values, that's where you put it. So that new people who are joining can read it and say, oh, we understand that your group is founded on respect. And this is what that means. And here's the core behaviors of this group. But sometimes people skip that step because it is a lot of work.
Right.
And same thing when you join up an institution, you should read their handbook, right? A school, a religious institution, even your doctor's policies. Sometimes doctors will say like pediatricians, some of them will say oh, we only want patients that are fully vaccinated or something like that. And if you are not
Yes.
one of those people, then you're this isn't the best place for me. So I'm going to leave. So reading policies is important just for being able to find your tribe and be able to create a tribe.
And when
Uh,
you're tribe shopping, right? Like if you're looking for
yes.
doctors or so that's the perspective of the tribe creator. But if you're tribe shopping or you're looking, right? Like I went for doctors for schools, like I'll always have a list of questions that I'll, call them up, or if I meet them, all right,
Yes.
here's my list. And if you there's certain things that are non-negotiable for me or whatever, for our family, then all right, well, we know this is not a fit. And then others was like, well, that wasn't the answer I hoped for, but let's keep talking and see if we can work
Yes.
through
Yeah,
it.
and that's a good idea. Like, have a list of, like, core questions that are really important for you for that kind of institution. I did that when I was visiting a bunch of churches. I had a list of questions, and I could just go through that list real quick, and if they kind of froze or gave me a weird answer, then it was like, "Well, this isn't a good fit," and I wouldn't, like, get frustrated and stay there and whatever. So, anyway, this was fantastic, though. This was like a good conversation on what to do when you're raising kids in this era of institutional failure and where kind of the world is on fire right now a little bit. We're all trying to figure out how to raise our kids and the best places to educate them and how to raise them and how to think. So, thank you, Simit. This was great. We'll do it
Yeah,
again soon.
definitely. Thanks, Sarah. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Schoolhouse. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast so more families can discover new possibilities for learning. And if you're ready to take the next step and start your own homeschool group or micro school, we'd love to help. Just head over to schoolmaking.com and fill out the form. We'll send you tools and guidance to get started. Until next time, remember, learning doesn't just happen in the classroom, it happens everywhere.